I'm going to be doing a quick how-to video here. I'm tearing apart the Holley 4160 carburetor that I run on my old 56 Ford pickup. And see if we can get the camera situated where I want it. There we go. I have already emptied the fuel out of it. You do that by removing a bolt there and another one in the back side. There was no gas in the primary side bowl, which is something that I kind of expected to see, because that was the trouble I was having. It was like it was flooding after you shut it down. So I assume the power valve is blown, or the gasket, one of the gaskets in here is shrunk up and is no longer sealing. So we'll see what we find. I'm going to try to do this as quick as I can. I'm only going to tear it down as far as I kind of need to. I'm going to basically overhaul it, rebuild it with a kit. A buddy of mine says he's got all the separate gaskets, needles, and seats, and power valves, and gaskets, everything in a, just loose. So I may go that route if his gaskets aren't all old and dried out. So anyway, the 4160 model Holley is a little bit different than the 4150 in that the 4160 doesn't have, this is a metering block, and you get a power valve that mounts in it and jets, and those are of course changeable. In the back you just have a plate that's in there, and the orifices are fixed size, so there is no real adjustment. And then a lot of your Holleys are external adjusting needle and seat. This is your needle and seat's going down in right here, and this is your sight hole. So you, with the engine running, you adjust that until it just starts to trickle out the bottom, and then you're good on your fuel levels. So that's kind of a nice feature on Holleys, that you can do that. Got to be careful, of course, with the engine running, and make sure you contain any gas that might be coming out. And also, I'll show you another difference here between the two carburetors. The 4150 has another a plate, a block like that one in front, also on the secondary. So you also can have a power valve, and of course your jets are changeable. So they're a little bit more tunable carburetor. And they're usually, I think they're always like a dual inlet. They'll have a teed fuel line that'll come in either side. This one, the 4150s, just transfer fuel from the primary bowl to the secondary via this tube that's sealed with O-rings on either end. So anyway, I need, no, it's going to come out. I was going to say I need a little wrench for that nut, but so anyway, the bolts are ready to come off. I can tell that the gaskets that are in it are not sticking real well. There's the power valve that I was talking about being possibly blown. There's of course the transfer tube. This carburetor probably hasn't been apart in 30 years, so some of the stuff is going to be pretty stuck. Let's see if we can get her right apart without hurting anything on myself. And old glued on gaskets just do not like to give it out. So I'm trying to get it a little rough. Tool here. very windy day here. I hope the wind's not too disruptive on the audio. Don't necessarily advocate beating on a carburetor, but sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. Holley always adhesive coated their gaskets to, so you can see where it's torn. That's how good it was sticking. They do that because by their design, they're taking a bowl, putting it on its side, and then trying to hold gas in it. So, you know, the gaskets are very critical. Most carburetors, the bowls sit like a bowl. Anyway, so we get into this accelerator pump. It's operated over here off of this throttle. It's got a cam, plastic cam mounted here, and that pushes that, which in turn pushes this diaphragm in there. Gas goes through the passage and comes to the squirters that are in the primary bores there, and gives you a shot of gas whenever you're moving the accelerator forward. They do have some duration. This spring right here, when you first jump on it, it'll compress a little bit like so, and then even when your foot stops, then it'll uncoil and it'll give you just a little more accelerator pump. So, and you can change these cams to different profiles. You know, if you need more gas or less gas, or you need more in the middle, or you know, whatever you want to do there, it's fully adjustable. This really isn't an adjustment. You just adjust that to be just short of bottoming out that lever there. You don't want to have this completely bottom out, because then you start bending stuff. So, pretty simple carburetor. This is a automatic choke, hot air automatic choke, an integral choke mounted on the carburetor. Brings hot air up from a choke stove built into the right side manifold on that old FE motor I've got in my truck there. So anyway, spring, diaphragm, that's a check ball. Normally don't take that out unless you need to. I'm surprised how clean the carburetor is inside, so this is going to be an easy cleanup. The float, very similar setup to a float in a toilet if you've ever done any home plumbing. Very, very similar deal. Fuel level comes into the bowl, raises this up, it pushes on the needle and seat, which is this right here. Take this apart. I knew I forgot something. I don't have my wrench nut here. Let's see if I need it. No, maybe not. Got a lock screw and then the adjusting nut gasket below, above and below the nut. Anyway, your needle and seats all built together. That's a rubber tip that just seals in an orifice in there as the float rises, shuts it off. Very simple stuff. This is just a plastic baffle that goes in there, and that's just to keep incoming gas from splashing all over the place. Simple stuff. Here's the jets. Screwdriver here. I'm not going to mess with the jetting on it. I know I've changed them. I think I probably jetted it down a little bit from stock because we are at 5,000 foot here, and so it's running a little rich. This carburetor, I do believe, was originally off a replacement carburetor for like a 71 351 Ford, I'm thinking, if I remember right. This is the transfer tube that transfers fuel from that accelerator pump passage, comes up to there, goes in there, and then it gets up to the squirters. You can change the size of those squirters too, size and design. This has got O-rings on it, and you can see that they're, maybe you can't see, but anyway, they're so flat they were probably not sealing. We've got a handy dandy power valve tool. I don't know if it'll, yep, come right loose. This diaphragm was possibly leaking. That's where all the gas went and out of the carburetor, and of course it just goes down into the intake manifold, floods the motor. So that's not good. And then it could be one of these two gaskets, although they look like they were printing pretty good. Probably sealing okay. It'll take probably a while to, sometimes you gotta scrape some of the gasket off of the surfaces. And yeah, see, I got a little bit left there, but that's not bad. This side will be probably a lot worse. Shred this gasket. And it'll take a while to clean up. I won't bother showing you that part. That's how cleanup goes. It's just busy work. I'll use a knife very carefully and just skim it along the surface so I do not damage this hot metal surface. Some kind of aluminum alloy. But yeah, these gaskets are just going to come off in shreds. And that's typical. The earlier gaskets were cork. And they sealed. They had kind of a, they had kind of impregnated them with some kind of a sealant, adhesive of some sort. So they would, when you tighten them up, they'd seal quite good, but they were prone to shrinking, and they would just shrink up, and of course they wouldn't seal anymore, and just get gas pouring right out of the fuel bowl into the carburetor, or externally, or whatever. So that's pretty ancient technology on those corks. Okay, I'm not going to bore you with any more of that. I'll get back to that. Finish cleaning it up. Nothing else to do here. The secondary side is going to be exactly pretty much the same disassembly as the primary side was, so I won't bore you with that. This is the metering plate in the back. I've got a little butterfly clutch tip screwdriver for those screws. Not sure why they decided to put these funny headed screws in here, but they did. Forces you to buy another tool if you're doing it as a pro. Amateur, you could probably reshape an old screwdriver and make it work, but it's like this little stand, adjustable stand I've got the carburetor sitting on. Most home people don't have those, but when you do it for a living, I want to do that. I know where all these screws go, and if you're a newbie to it, for sure you want to take some pictures as you're going, and so you know where everything goes back together. This is going to be another stuck deal here. So I'm going to very carefully get in behind it. There we go. So that seals, there's gas between it, and then there's another plate inside, just a flat steel plate. I'm going to have to, it's stuck big time, and I don't want to bend the heck out of it, so I will wait and do that off camera. But anyway, I'm going to have to get a knife and come in behind this gasket here and get it going. Okay, you can see some extra gas coming out, that's why I got rags. There we go. So wasn't that big a deal, that's good. Scraping those sucks. Any kind of cleanup is just boring and tedious. Normally I'd have some kind of music going, but the copyright laws, you know. Don't want to mess with that because I can't control what you put on the radio. But it also doesn't take real long to do this stuff. Okay, now we'll move over to the choke. The choke is a simple little device. They're the oldie, they use these forever. They're a bimetal spring. I'll show it to you when I get it apart here. Kind of a little bit of magic that they came up with years ago. Some very smart people. Very simple, very effective. Not super precise. You know, when they started worrying about emissions, this kind of stuff went out. This one's a little bit misshapen, but anyway, this coil does this when you heat it or cool it, and it runs this tang, which in turn runs your butterfly up there. So this is what they call a bimetal spring. It's actually 2 layers laminated together, you know, this way, an inner and an outer. And the 2 metals have different properties. So one of them expands quicker than the other one when you heat it. So that's why you'll get that. It'll just start uncoiling or coiling, whichever way it is. And it's, you know, it's just simple, but it was effective, and God, they used that for, you know, 80 years, 90 years. Then they started going electric and controlling it a little closer and stuff. Okay, as far as disassembly, we're going to continue. This is the choke housing. 3 screws. If I remember right, they're all, I haven't pulled one of these apart in a long time. I think they're all 3 the same length. Yeah, they look like they are. Her needle nose here, because there's going to be a little clip down here holding the lever to the rod, one of those clips. Do that, this will come off. We got a gasket, a little cork gasket right there, sealing between, you know, the carburetor pulls the vacuum through that passage, pulls vacuum on this housing, and that's what pulls the heat up from the choke stove down on the manifold. So pretty simple stuff, but that's the way they did it. There is other type chokes. If you have like a Dodge or something like that with a carburetor, probably it had the choke mounted down on the intake manifold, and it used heat from the crossover, the exhaust crossover through the intake manifold, and that area would get hot, so they'd set their little thermostatic little housing down there with, and that's how they would heat. So this is a Ford, so it's set up a little different with the integral. It's another E-clip holding this is your secondary diaphragm. When velocity gets going through the carburetor fast enough, down there's a port that will start pulling vacuum on this diaphragm, and it'll pull up and it'll open up the secondaries. So that's how the secondaries work on these. And let's see, there should be 3 screws, I think, on this. Yeah. Like, so you don't need to tear down any more than you need to. You know, some people, I'll show you some definite no-nos as far as stuff to take apart here. Get this done. Okay, that's your secondary assembly. It's got another one of those little cork gaskets on for the seal the vacuum passage. So on these things here, this little piston, that is a vacuum piston that as soon as you start your engine, that piston gets engine vacuum, it sucks down, and it cracks this choke open part way. You know, another simple but effective method of, and so that's imperative, you know. And if this piston is real sticky, then you definitely want to take it apart here to, you know, clean the carbon out of it or wherever it's in there. But if you don't have to take it apart, I hesitate to take them apart, because usually where this shaft goes through, there's a thin piece of plastic sheeting, you know, that's just big enough for it acts like a kind of a bushing, but it's more of a seal. And those things can be a nightmare to deal with, to get back in and get your shaft through them and this and that. So if you don't have to take it apart, don't take it apart. Just leave it. It'll be fine. Of course, these gaskets, the cork gaskets, will get replaced. Okay, now the squirters. Another Phillips screw down in here. We'll have the screw that holds it in place. And they've got the squirters themselves. And there's a gasket. There's a gasket on either side of the squirt. You know, the nozzle assembly here. This one's got the extended nozzles, like so. Some of them don't have those extensions. They just merely squirt out of right there. You see, it's been doing some backfiring. It was just running horrible. And all that gas was flooding down it. And then there's always a check ball or a needle down below, you know, where I just took this screw and that nozzle out. There's going to be a check down in there, and that's to keep gas from going back to that way. It's a one-way valve, and it's just a little needle. Okay, we're almost done. Please, for you guys, I get to continue on with doing some scraping. Okay, we got 6 screws down here. These 2 holes don't get used on this particular one. You definitely want to make sure you don't put these 2 screws over here, because then that'll expose extra vacuum to your power valve, and that's not good. It'll pop it. And reassembly is basically just reverse of what I'm doing here. I may or may not show the reassembly. You know, it takes longer, obviously, than disassembly, but not that much longer. I mean, they are really a simple carburetor. Just you match up the gaskets, so you make sure you're putting the right ones in, because there is a big variety of gaskets. Some of these carburetors don't have that little accelerator pump passage tube that I showed, and so they would have a different gasket. They would have, you know, material all the way across with just a hole in it. If you put that gasket in on one of those carburetors, you're gonna have a mess. So, anyway, the throttle body here, you don't want to disassemble it. Gentle tap there. Got a gasket between. This is a little bit of an advantage actually on Holleys over like the old Carter AFBs, which is now the Edelbrock 4 barrels, in that they're one piece as far as this and this part. They don't have that gasket in there. That little bit of gasket there can be beneficial as far as not transferring intake manifold heat into the carburetor. And with today's gasoline, it's formulated for fuel injection. It doesn't work worth crap on carburetors. So if you get your engine getting hot and you shut it off and you go to start it 5, 10, 15 minutes later, it'll just not want to idle. It sits there and fusses. Idle goes up and down, and it's just fuming, and it just carries on for too long of a time. And now it's cool gas coming in and hitting that hot gas, and the stuff is boiling, and it's just a nightmare trying to, and you know, and it's hard to do anything. The gas, like I said, it's for fuel injection. So anyway, on these screws right here on these throttle plates, those are staked over. If I was to put a screwdriver on that head thinking I'm going to take it out, I would snap off the head and I'd have a broken screw in that shaft. So what if you do need to take them off, and you really, on these, there's virtually no reason to do that. But if for some reason you got to do it, you got to take a grinder, like a Dremel, and you got to take those clear down, get rid of all that, because they're swedged over, swelled out. So you got to grind them clear down to the shaft, then they'll come out, and then you put in either new screws and restake them, or put them in with some Loctite. You know, it'd be better if they were longer, new screws staked, because you don't want one coming loose and going down through your motor. Anyway, that is how to tear down a Holley 4160. This diaphragm in here, if I have a new one, I might put it in, but you can tell if the diaphragm's good. Yeah, see how it held in when I put my finger over the... So yeah, the diaphragm's fine, so I will probably not even take that apart. And but the gasket sets, power valve, needle and seat, that's what I'll be replacing when I go back together with it. So anyway, hope you enjoyed the video.